The Omen. The Galactic Council Hall, a massive structure floating in the heart of the Empire's capital, was unusually quiet. Its usual hum of bureaucratic chatter was replaced by tense whispers. Representatives from hundreds of star systems gathered, their faces grim as the holographic display above the central table flickered to life. A trembling voice broke the silence. "This footage is all we managed to retrieve before the ship was destroyed," said Captain Myros, the sole survivor of an Empire scout fleet sent to investigate the outer territories. His uniform was torn, his face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. The footage began to play. A dark expanse of space filled the screen, serene at first. Then, an enormous shadow loomed into view. One by one, massive starships appeared, sleek, ominous, and glowing with an eerie blue light. The ships dwarfed anything the Empire had ever built. Each seemed to pulse with energy, their surfaces brimming with advanced technology. "What are those?" demanded Lord Thevan, the Council's most senior member. His voice shook with disbelief. "Are they even real?" Captain Myros nodded, his eyes wide. "Real, my lord. And they're coming." The footage ended abruptly, the last frame showing the scout ship's desperate attempt to flee. A brilliant flash engulfed the screen before it went black. Silence followed, heavier than before. "Where did they come from?" another counselor asked. Myros swallowed hard. "We don't know, but their trajectory indicates they're headed straight for Sector 14. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Sector 14 was home to some of the Empire's most critical strongholds, including resource-rich colonies and military stations. Losing it would be catastrophic. "They're just ships," scoffed Admiral Voren, a veteran of countless campaigns. "We've dealt with alien fleets before. Mobilize the Navy, and we'll send these intruders back to wherever they came from." But Myros shook his head. "Admiral, you don't understand. These ships are unlike anything we've ever faced. Our scans couldn't even penetrate their hulls. Their weapons, they destroyed an entire fleet in minutes." The Council erupted into chaos. Some called for immediate action, demanding fleets be dispatched to intercept the intruders. Others argued for caution, fearing a confrontation could provoke something worse. Amid the uproar, Lady Inara, the Council's youngest and most progressive member, stood up. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the noise. "Before we act, we must know who they are and what they want. An unprovoked attack could lead to our destruction." Thevan sneered, "And waiting might do the same. We cannot allow unknown forces to march into our territory unchallenged." Inara countered, "Recklessness has doomed civilizations before. We need to send envoys, gather intelligence." The debate raged on, but in the end, the majority sided with Thevan and Voren. The Empire's pride would not allow for caution. They would show these intruders the might of the Galactic Navy. Far from the capital, in the quiet reaches of Sector 14, the alien fleet loomed closer. Colonists on the frontier had already begun reporting strange sightings, flashes of light, the hum of engines that made the ground tremble. Some dismissed them as rumors. Others began to flee. On the bridge of the Valiant, one of the Empire's most advanced warships, Commander Rykar stared at his screens. The incoming fleet was enormous, their signatures overwhelming. He had received orders to intercept and delay them until reinforcements arrived. But deep down, he knew the task was impossible. "They're not slowing down," reported his tactical officer. "They're maintaining a direct course." Rykar clenched his jaw. "Open a channel. Let's see if they'll talk." The screen flickered, and for a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a voice came through, calm yet filled with quiet menace. "This is Admiral Kell of the Terran Ascendancy. Surrender your forces, and no harm will come to you." Rykar blinked. Terran. That name hadn't been heard in centuries. Humanity, the long-forgotten species exiled from the galaxy, had vanished into the void. They were presumed extinct after their banishment from the Galactic Council's territory. Rykar steadied himself. This is Commander Rykar of the Galactic Empire. You are trespassing in Imperial space. Turn back now, or we will respond with force. There was a pause before Cal's voice returned, colder than before. You will try. The channel went dead. Back in the council hall, the first reports from the front lines began to trickle in. The Empire's intercept fleet had engaged the intruders and been decimated. Survivors described an enemy that seemed untouchable, their ships moving with precision and power that defied understanding. Inara received the news with dread. We should have listened, she whispered, though no one was there to hear her. The Empire's arrogance had brought this upon them, and now the consequences were hurtling toward them at faster-than-light speed. The mysterious fleet was coming, and with them, humanity's long-forgotten vengeance, the echoes of exile. The Galactic Council Hall was in chaos. Reports of humanity's devastating fleet were spreading like wildfire. The once proud Galactic Empire, which had ruled for millennia, was now faced with the chilling prospect of an adversary they had long dismissed as extinct. Lady Inara, seated in her private chamber, reviewed the intercepted communication from the Terran fleet. She played Admiral Cal's message over and over, the weight of his calm words sinking deeper into her thoughts. You will try. Humanity was supposed to be gone, eradicated, forgotten, buried under the Empire's history of triumphs. Yet here they were, not as a forgotten relic, but as a force of unimaginable power. Inara closed her eyes and sighed. How had it come to this? Centuries ago, humanity had been cast out from the Galactic Council. The reasons had been debated and rewritten so many times that even the Empire's historians struggled to separate fact from fiction. The prevailing story was one of arrogance. Humans had defied the Council, seeking to rise above their station. When they refused to comply with the Council's decrees, they were exiled, their homeworld Earth rendered untouchable under threat of annihilation. It was a punishment intended to break them. Instead, it had forged them into something unrecognizable. The mysterious signal that started it all had been detected 3 weeks earlier, a repeating pattern originating from beyond known space. The Empire's first assumption was that it was a rogue faction or a lost colony. But as the fleet drew nearer, it became clear that this was something far greater. The Terran fleet, now being referred to as the Ghost Armada by terrified whispers, was an enigma. Their technology, their tactics, their sheer scale, all of it defied understanding. The Empire's spies and analysts scrambled to piece together fragments of the truth. What they found only deepened the fear. In a hidden research facility on Corvallis Prime, a team of analysts pored over the ancient records of humanity's exile. Dr. Vren, a historian who specialized in pre-exile civilizations, stood before the group with trembling hands. This is what we missed, she stammered, pulling up a centuries-old file. When we exiled them, we assumed their isolation would destroy them. Instead, they vanished, but not before leaving us a warning. She highlighted a single line from the ancient transcript. Cast us out if you must, but know this, we will not return as beggars. The room fell silent. The Empire had underestimated humanity, ignoring them as a species too insignificant to monitor. Now that ignorance threatened their very existence, Dr. Vren's assistant broke the silence. What do we know about their fleet? Vren hesitated, then brought up an image, a blurred still from the footage sent by the last surviving scout ship. It showed one of humanity's colossal warships in all its terrible glory. Its hull gleamed with a strange energy field, and its design was both elegant and terrifying, as if every aspect of it was meant to convey dominance. These ships, Vren said, her voice low, are designed for one purpose: war. And if their trajectory holds, they'll reach the capital within weeks. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Terran fleet, Admiral Cal stood aboard the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, humanity's flagship. He gazed out at the void, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Commander Sarah approached. The intercept fleet was destroyed, she reported. The Empire is scrambling to mount a larger defense. Kale nodded, his hands clasped behind his back. Let them. It won't change the outcome. Sarah hesitated. Admiral, if I may, do you ever wonder if we're going too far? Some of the crew. Kale turned, his gaze piercing. Too far. Commander, they exiled us. They left us to die. We survived the impossible because we had no choice. And now we return, not as victims, but as equals. If the Empire wishes to avoid war, they will have to beg for it. Sarah nodded, though her doubts lingered. Cal's resolve was unshakable, his vision clear. But as they drew closer to the Empire's heart, she couldn't help but wonder if there was still a chance for peace. In the Empire's capital, the Council prepared for war. Fleets were mobilized, weapon systems activated, and planetary shields raised. But for all their preparations, there was an undercurrent of fear, a gnawing realization that they might already be too late. Inara, watching from the shadows, couldn't shake the sense of dread. The Terrans aren't coming to negotiate, she thought. They're coming to finish what the Empire started. The omen was clear. The galaxy's long-forgotten outcasts had returned, and they would not be ignored. The first clash. The Galactic Empire's fleet hung in the void like a shimmering wall of steel and light. Thousands of ships, from nimble interceptors to massive dreadnoughts, stood ready, their weapon systems humming with lethal energy. It was a display of power meant to intimidate, to remind the Terrans of the Empire's might. But the Terran fleet did not waver. On the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kale observed the enemy formation with a calm, calculating gaze. The Terran ships dwarfed their Imperial counterparts, their sheer size and design exuding an overwhelming presence. Energy shields rippled faintly along their hulls, and their weapon ports glowed with an eerie, pulsating light. Admiral, Commander Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. The Empire's fleet is holding position. They've issued a broadcast demanding our surrender. Kale smirked faintly. And what terms do they offer for our surrender? They threaten to destroy us if we don't stand down, Sarah replied, her lips tightening. Their commander says they'll give us one chance to retreat. Cal's smirk turned into a grin. How generous. He turned to his communications officer. Open a channel. Let's hear what they have to say. On the Imperial flagship Triumphant Glory, Admiral Tarek stood at the forefront of the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a veteran of countless campaigns, his name synonymous with victory. Yet now, staring at the holographic display of the Terran fleet, a flicker of unease crossed his mind. When the channel opened, Tarek straightened, his expression hardening. This is Admiral Tarek of the Galactic Empire. You are trespassing in Imperial space with hostile intent. Stand down immediately, or we will be forced to engage. Admiral Cal's face appeared on the screen, his demeanor composed yet commanding. Admiral Tarek, it seems your empire has forgotten the meaning of respect. Humanity does not recognize your authority. Tarek's jaw tightened. You are outnumbered and outmatched, Cal. Whatever myths you've clung to about humanity's strength will shatter here. This is your only warning. Cal's gaze was unwavering. Outnumbered, perhaps. Outmatched. He gestured subtly, and the Terran fleet's formation shifted, its ships aligning with precision. I suppose we'll find out. Tarek's patience snapped. So be it. Prepare for annihilation. The first shots were fired moments later. Imperial ships unleashed a barrage of energy bolts, streaking across the void in a dazzling display of firepower. The beams collided with the Terran fleet's shields, erupting into bursts of light, but failing to penetrate. Cal's voice rang out on the Eternal Resolve. Return fire. The Terran response was swift and devastating. Energy cannons and railguns discharged in unison, sending waves of destruction toward the Imperial fleet. Ships that had withstood centuries of conflict were torn apart in seconds, their shields no match for the advanced Terran weaponry. On the Triumphant Glory, Chaos erupted as officers scrambled to adjust their tactics. "Their weapons, how are they this powerful?" one shouted. Tarek's fists clenched. "Focus fire on their flagship. We need to break their formation." The Empire's fleet regrouped, targeting the Eternal Resolve with everything they had. The space around the Terran flagship erupted into a storm of light and energy. But when the explosions cleared, the Eternal Resolve remained unscathed. Commander Sarah watched the battle unfold, her heart pounding. The Terran fleet was overwhelming the enemy with precision strikes, their superior technology dismantling the Empire's once mighty armada. Yet, despite the victory, a shadow of doubt lingered in her mind. "Admiral," she said, stepping closer to Kale, "the Empire isn't going to back down, no matter how many ships we destroy. Their pride won't let them." Kale nodded, his expression unreadable. "Pride is their weakness. They believe they are invincible because no one has challenged them in centuries. We're here to remind them that their reign is over." "But at what cost?" Sarah asked quietly. "If we destroy them completely, what does that make us?" Cal's gaze softened just for a moment. Survivors. Back on the Imperial capital, news of the battle reached the council chambers. The reports were grim. Dozens of Imperial ships destroyed, with minimal losses on the Terran side. The room was filled with hushed murmurs and panicked whispers. Lady Inara sat in the corner, her thoughts racing. She had warned them not to underestimate humanity. Now, her fears were coming true. One of the counselors turned to her. "What do we do, Inara? The Terrans are unstoppable." Inara stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We find a way to negotiate. If we don't, the Empire will fall." "And if they refuse?" the counselor asked. Inara's gaze darkened. "Then we prepare for the end." As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Empire was fighting a losing war. But Admiral Kale knew this was only the beginning. The real fight would come not from the fleet before them, but from the shadowed halls of the Empire's leadership. The galaxy had ignored humanity for too long. Now they would have no choice but to listen. Shadows of betrayal. The aftermath of the first clash rippled across the galaxy like a tidal wave. News of humanity's fleet decimating the Empire's armada reached every corner of Imperial space, sowing fear and doubt among its citizens and leaders. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Empire appeared vulnerable. On the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kale convened a strategy meeting. The bridge was abuzz with activity, officers analyzing data from the battle. But Kale's focus was on the central holotable displaying the Empire's territories. Commander Sarah entered the room, her face tight with concern. "Admiral, we've intercepted a transmission from the Empire. It's not encoded." Kale raised an eyebrow. "A public broadcast. That's unusual. Play it." The screen flickered, revealing the face of Lady Inara, one of the Empire's highest-ranking officials. Her tone was calculated, her words sharp. "Citizens of the Empire," she began, "we have suffered a grievous attack by the Terrans, a species we once deemed insignificant. Their unprovoked aggression threatens the stability of our great civilization. But I assure you, the Empire will not falter." Kale frowned as the broadcast continued. Inara's speech was laced with just enough truth to sound credible, but it twisted humanity's actions into a narrative of tyranny. She was preparing the Empire for a war of total annihilation. "Clever," Kale muttered. "She's uniting her people by painting us as the villains." Sarah crossed her arms. "It's not just propaganda. Intelligence suggests she's consolidating power. Some of the counselors are hesitant about escalating the war. Inara's using this crisis to push them aside." Kale leaned forward, his mind racing. "If she's gaining control, it means she's planning something big. We need to stay ahead of her." Meanwhile, in the heart of the Empire's capital, Inara met with her closest advisors. The council chambers were dimly lit, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Empire's usual displays of opulence. Lady Inara, one of her generals, said, "The fleet at Tarvin Station is ready for deployment. We can launch a counteroffensive within days. Inara shook her head. A direct attack will only embolden them. The Terrans have proven they're not to be underestimated. We need to be smarter. She turned to another advisor. What of the Terran sympathizers within our ranks? They're growing in number, he admitted. Some of the outer colonies are even considering defecting. The Terrans' victory has given them hope. Inara's eyes narrowed. Then we must extinguish that hope. Identify the ringleaders and make examples of them. Quietly. Yes, my lady. As the meeting continued, Inara's mind lingered on a different thought, a question that had been gnawing at her since the battle. How had humanity achieved such rapid advancement? The last reports on Terran technology had shown a fractured primitive civilization. Their fleet's power was beyond explanation. Begin covert operations to uncover their secrets, she ordered. I want to know how they built those warships, and who helped them. Back on the Eternal Resolve, Kale and his crew reviewed the intercepted transmissions. It was clear the Empire was regrouping, but the hints of internal dissent intrigued him. They're struggling to maintain control, Kale observed. If we can exploit that, we might avoid a prolonged war. Sarah looked skeptical. And if they unite before we can act? Kale sighed. Then we'll have no choice but to show them the full strength of humanity. Just as he finished speaking, an alert flashed on the console. Admiral, a comms officer reported, we're picking up an encrypted message from an Imperial source. It's marked urgent. Kale frowned. Decrypt it. The message played moments later, a voice Kale didn't recognize but one filled with urgency. To the Terran fleet, not all within the Empire support this war. There are those of us who see the truth, that your actions are a response to our arrogance. We may be able to help you, but you must act quickly. Inara's plans will bring devastation to us all. The message ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. Could be a trap, Sarah said cautiously. Or a genuine offer, Kale countered. Either way, we can't ignore it. Far from the battlefields, on the barren moon of Jorith, a secret meeting was taking place. A group of Imperial dissidents had gathered, their faces cloaked in shadow. Among them was a young diplomat named Terran, who had risked everything to send the message to the Terrans. They'll come, Terran said confidently, though doubt lingered in his voice. They have to. And if they don't? Another dissident asked. Then we're all dead, Terran admitted. Inara's ambitions will destroy not just humanity, but the Empire itself. As they spoke, a faint hum filled the air. The group turned toward the horizon, where a massive Terran ship descended, its silhouette blocking out the stars. The meeting was about to change the course of history. Back on the Eternal Resolve, Kale stood on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the Imperial moon. He knew this was a gamble, but it was one worth taking. The Empire was fracturing, and the cracks were widening. Commander Sarah, he said, prepare a landing party. Let's see if these dissidents are truly allies, or the Empire's bait. As the ship prepared for the descent, Kale felt the weight of the moment. The galaxy was on the brink of upheaval, and humanity stood at the center of it all. Seeds of rebellion. The Terran ship's descent onto the barren moon of Jorith was nothing short of theatrical. Its sleek, battle-scarred hull reflected the faint light of the distant star, an unspoken warning of the power it carried. The Imperial dissidents stood in uneasy silence, their faces shrouded in both fear and hope as the colossal warship cast its shadow over the ground. Inside the Eternal Resolve, Admiral Kale observed the landing party as they prepared to disembark. Commander Sarah adjusted her gear, her expression unreadable but her movements precise. You know this could be a trap, Sarah said, breaking the silence as she clipped her weapon to her side. It could, Kale replied, his voice steady. But it's also our best chance to fracture the Empire from within. We need to take the risk. Moments later, the landing party stepped out onto the moon's surface, weapons at the ready but not raised. The dissidents, led by the young diplomat Terran, cautiously emerged from their hiding place, their faces illuminated by the ship's external lights. "Admiral Kale," Terran began, his voice trembling slightly, "thank you for trusting us." Kale studied him for a moment. The young man didn't seem like a soldier or a seasoned spy. His diplomatic demeanor was betrayed by the nervous twitch of his hands. "We'll see if that trust is deserved," Kale replied. "Why have you reached out?" Terran straightened, his voice gaining strength. "Because the Empire is collapsing from within. Inara's lust for power is creating enemies on all sides, within the Council, the military, and even the colonies. Many of us believe she'll lead the galaxy into ruin, but we can't fight her alone." Cal's eyes narrowed. "And what do you expect from us in return?" "Support," Terran said simply. "Resources, protection. If you can help us weaken her hold, we can deliver key intelligence, fleet movements, supply lines, internal dissension." Commander Sarah folded her arms. This could still be a ploy, a way to lure us into overextending. Terran shook his head vehemently. "It's not. Look around you." He gestured at the desolate moon. "This is where the Empire dumps its problems. Us, dissenters, anyone who dares question Inara's rule. I wouldn't risk my life just to trick you." Cal's gaze didn't waver. "Words are cheap, Terran. Prove it." Inside a hidden chamber on the moon, Terran and his fellow dissidents revealed stolen Imperial data. The holo display filled the room with schematics, troop movements, and classified information on Inara's secret weapon projects. "This," Terran said, pointing to a set of blueprints, "is the Crown of Dominion, Inara's flagship under construction. It's designed to command an entire fleet, outfitted with experimental weapons we don't fully understand." Kale leaned in, studying the designs. The ship was enormous, dwarfing even the Eternal Resolve. It was clear that the Crown of Dominion wasn't just a warship, it was a symbol of Inara's supremacy. "If this ship is completed," Terran continued, "it will solidify her control over the Empire. No one will dare challenge her." Sarah exchanged a glance with Kale. "If we destroy it before it's operational, we could cripple her plans," Kale finished. He turned to Terran. "Why give us this? If Inara finds out you've leaked this, it's not just your life on the line. It's everyone here." Terran's expression hardened. "Because the Empire I once believed in no longer exists. Inara's turned it into a machine of fear and control. If humanity is the only force strong enough to stop her, then I'll take that chance." Kale nodded slowly. "You've given us a target. Now we need to see if you can deliver on the rest of your promises." Back on the Eternal Resolve, Kale gathered his senior officers. The room was tense, the weight of their next steps pressing heavily on everyone's shoulders. "Destroying the Crown of Dominion won't just be a military strike," Kale said, addressing the group. "It'll be a declaration of open war. If we fail, humanity won't get a second chance." Sarah spoke up, her voice measured. "If we succeed, it could inspire more dissidents to rise against Inara. The Empire is already fracturing. We just need to push it over the edge." Another officer chimed in. "What about the dissidents themselves? Can we really trust them?" Kale glanced at the stolen data projected on the screen. "We don't have a choice. This is the best lead we've had. But we'll proceed with caution." The plan began to take shape. The Eternal Resolve would lead a small elite strike team to infiltrate the Crown of Dominion's construction site. Meanwhile, Terran's network of dissidents would feed false information to the Empire, creating confusion and delaying reinforcements. In the heart of the Empire, Lady Inara stood on the observation deck of the Crown of Dominion. The massive ship was still under construction, but its skeletal frame already loomed over the shipyard like a sleeping giant. "Soon," she murmured, her voice laced with satisfaction. "Soon, they'll see the futility of resistance." One of her aides approached, bowing deeply. "Lady Inara, reports indicate increased activity among the dissidents on Joreth. Shall we deploy a response?" Inara's eyes flashed with anger. "Let them gather. Their desperation only confirms their weakness. When the crown is complete, they'll be the first to fall. Unbeknownst to her, the seeds of rebellion were already taking root, and humanity's fleet was preparing to strike at the very heart of her empire. The galaxy's balance was teetering, and the next move would determine its fate. The strike begins. The Eternal Resolve emerged from the silent veil of hyperspace, its engines humming like the heartbeat of a predator lying in wait. The crew worked with precision, their movements practiced but tense. On the bridge, Admiral Kale stood at the central console, his eyes fixed on the holo-display of the Empire's massive shipyard. The crown of Dominion loomed ahead, its skeletal frame partially illuminated by construction lights. Even incomplete, the colossal ship was a daunting sight, radiating raw power and menace. "Commence Phase 1, Kale ordered, his voice steady despite the mounting tension. A series of smaller Terran ships detached from the Eternal Resolve, their engines running low to avoid detection. These strike craft, armed with EMP devices and cloaking technology, had a single mission: to sabotage the shipyard's defenses. Every second counted. On the ground, Terran and his dissident allies moved swiftly through the shadows of the Imperial shipyard. Disguised as maintenance workers, they carried crates of explosives disguised as repair equipment. Terran's heart pounded as he glanced at the timer on his wrist. They had less than an hour to plant the charges and escape before all hell broke loose. "You're sure this will work?" one of his companions whispered. Terran nodded, though his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "It has to. If we don't take this risk, the crown will destroy any hope we have left." As they placed the last explosive near a critical power relay, an alarm blared across the facility. One of the dissidents cursed under his breath. "We've been spotted," Terran hissed. "Move." The group sprinted for cover as Imperial guards closed in, their shouts echoing across the metal corridors. Terran fired his weapon, the sound of the blaster shots drowned out by the growing chaos. He could only hope the charges would detonate as planned. Back on the Eternal Resolve, Kel's command console lit up with warning signals. "We've been detected," Sarah reported, her tone clipped. "Imperial fighters are scrambling." Kale nodded grimly. "Initiate the next phase. Send the drones to intercept." Swarms of automated Terran drones streaked toward the crown, their sleek frames cutting through the void like blades. They targeted the shipyard's outer defenses, creating chaos among the Empire's forces. Explosions rippled across the station, lighting up the darkness of space. "Direct hit on their shield generators," one officer reported. "Good," Cal said. "Deploy the boarding teams. The crown must not leave this shipyard intact." Inside the Empire's flagship, Lady Inara paced the command chamber, her calm exterior betraying no sign of the growing threat. She watched the chaos unfold on the monitors, her generals scrambling to restore order. "Humanity has grown bolder," she remarked, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Admirable, but foolish." A young officer approached, bowing. "Lady Inara, the Terran fleet is coordinating with dissidents on the ground. Shall we deploy reinforcements?" Inara turned to him, her eyes cold. "No, let them come. I want to see the depths of their desperation before I crush them." She turned back to the display, her confidence unwavering. Yet, somewhere deep within, a flicker of doubt began to form. Humanity had proven unpredictable before. What if this time was different? As the boarding team breached the crown's unfinished hull, Commander Sarah led her squad through dimly lit corridors. Their footsteps were muffled by the sound of distant explosions. The air was thick with tension, every corner a potential ambush. "We need to reach the command core," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "Take out their systems before they can recover." The team moved quickly, disabling security measures and evading patrols. They were close to the core when a squad of Imperial guards blocked their path. Blaster fire erupted, the corridor flashing with red and blue lights as both sides exchanged fire. Sarah ducked behind cover, her breathing steady despite the chaos. "Push forward. We can't let them hold us here." Her squad surged ahead, their determination outweighing the odds. One by one, the guards fell, and the Terrans pressed onward. They reached the command core, its walls lined with glowing panels that pulsed with energy. "Set the charges," Sarah ordered. "This ends here." On the surface of the shipyard, Terran's team fought desperately to hold their position. The explosives they had planted earlier detonated in a chain reaction, sending shockwaves through the facility. Fires spread across the station, and Imperial forces scrambled to contain the damage. "This is it," Terran muttered, watching the chaos unfold. "The Crown is vulnerable. They won't recover from this." But as he spoke, an enormous shadow fell over the battlefield. Terran looked up to see a second Imperial fleet emerging from hyperspace. Reinforcements. His heart sank. "Admiral Kale," he whispered into his communicator. "You've got incoming. A lot of it." On the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, Kale stared at the holo-display, his jaw tightening. The reinforcements were unexpected, and their arrival threatened to turn the tide of battle. "Pull the fleet into defensive formation," he commanded. "We hold the line at all costs." The final stage of the mission was underway, but victory was far from certain. As the Terran fleet engaged the new arrivals, Kale knew they were outnumbered, but not outmatched. Humanity's resolve would be tested, and the outcome of this battle would determine the future of the galaxy. The crown of dominion teetered on the brink of destruction, and with it, the fate of the Galactic Empire hung in the balance. The final gambit. The battle raged on, the void of space ablaze with the furious exchange of firepower. The Eternal Resolve, though battered, held its ground at the forefront of the Terran fleet. Admiral Kale stood firm, his eyes locked on the holo-display as waves of Imperial reinforcements clashed against the Terran defenses. "The reinforcements are overwhelming our flank," an officer shouted. Kale nodded grimly. "Pull back the outer ships into a tighter formation. Protect the flagship at all costs." The Terran fleet adjusted, their ships forming a resilient shield around the Eternal Resolve. Meanwhile, inside the unfinished Crown of Dominion, Commander Sarah and her team were racing against time. "Charges are set," Sarah reported through her comlink, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We're on our way out." The detonation countdown flashed on her wrist. 10 minutes. That's all they had to escape the labyrinth of corridors and make it back to their extraction point. Every step felt heavier as enemy reinforcements closed in. On the surface of the Imperial shipyard, Terran and his remaining allies were cornered, pinned down by advancing Imperial troops. The dissident leader grit his teeth, firing his weapon in short, controlled bursts. "We're not going to make it," one of his companions muttered. Terran's jaw tightened. "We don't have to win here. We just have to hold them off long enough for the fleet to finish the job." As the Imperial forces drew closer, Terran activated his comlink. "Admiral Kale, if you're planning a miracle, now's the time." Kale received the message, his expression unyielding. He turned to his tactical officer. "Are the reserve drones ready?" "Yes, sir," the officer replied, her hands hovering over the controls. "But deploying them now will leave the fleet vulnerable." Kale nodded. "It's a risk we'll have to take. Deploy them in a concentrated strike on the reinforcements. Create an opening." The drones swarmed forward like a cloud of vengeful shadows, weaving through the enemy lines with uncanny precision. They targeted the engines and weapon systems of the Imperial ships, causing devastating explosions that lit up the battlefield. The Imperial fleet began to falter, their formations breaking apart under the relentless assault. Kale seized the opportunity. "Now," he commanded, "focus all firepower on the Crown. Finish it." Inside the Crown, Sarah's team fought their way through the final corridor, the sound of blaster fire echoing behind them. They reached the extraction point just as the Terran shuttle arrived, its engines roaring to life. "Go, go, go," Sarah shouted, ushering her squad aboard. The shuttle lifted off, hurtling through the chaos of the battlefield. Behind them, the charges inside the Crown ticked down to 0. In a blinding flash, The unfinished superweapon erupted in a cascade of fire and debris, the explosion rippling outward like a dying star. Cheers erupted across the Terran fleet as the crown disintegrated, its threat extinguished. But the battle was not yet over. The remaining Imperial reinforcements regrouped, their leaders refusing to retreat despite the loss of their prized weapon. Lady Inara, watching the destruction from her command chamber aboard a nearby flagship, clenched her fists. "They've gone too far," she hissed. "Launch all remaining forces. Wipe them out." The Empire's retaliation was swift and brutal. Waves of fighters surged toward the Terran fleet, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm Cal's forces. "We're running out of options," one officer said, panic creeping into her voice. Cal stared at the display, his mind racing. Then an idea took shape. A desperate, reckless idea. "Redirect all power to the primary cannon," he ordered. "We'll use the Eternal Resolve as a battering ram." The bridge fell silent, the weight of Cal's words sinking in. To use the flagship's main cannon at such close range would not only destroy the enemy, but risk the Eternal Resolve itself. "It's our only chance," Cal said, his voice firm. "Initiate the sequence." As the flagship's cannon powered up, the crew prepared for the worst. Across the fleet, the Terran forces rallied, buying time for Cal's gambit to succeed. The cannon's glow intensified, a beacon of defiance in the darkness. On the enemy flagship, Lady Inara watched in horror as the Eternal Resolve surged forward, its cannon unleashing a devastating blast. The energy wave tore through the Imperial fleet, annihilating everything in its path. When the light faded, silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining Imperial ships, crippled and leaderless, began to retreat. The Terran fleet had won. On the bridge of the Eternal Resolve, Cal let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The ship was damaged but intact, a testament to humanity's resilience. "We did it," Sarah said over the comlink, her voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. "The crown is gone." Cal nodded, a faint smile breaking through his stoic demeanor. "We showed them what humanity is capable of. But this is just the beginning." As the Terran fleet regrouped, the survivors of the battle looked to the stars, their resolve stronger than ever. Humanity's message was clear. They would not be underestimated, and they would not be broken. And somewhere, in the shadowed corridors of the Empire, Lady Inara vowed revenge. The war was far from over.